All right. Well, thank you all for being here today. It looks like we've got a pretty good crew today, so thank you. I know everyone's really busy and this is often dense and technical information, but it's really important. So I just want to say thank you again. What we're talking about today is the compact form of development. This is a new set of development standards recognizing modern needs for creating housing supply. And we're going to walk through what those standards look like, where we would apply this, give you some examples and some thoughts for consideration, and then want to have a robust conversation, which I think we did the last time. And so again, I want to say thank you to you all for being here and for participating and giving us your feedback. We are scheduled for public hearing later this month and decision. So we're trying to get this through to make sure we have this tool available for housing before council goes on break. So it's a bit of an accelerated schedule. And so this is a really important time today to get some feedback from you all before we move into more of the public process with council. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Monica, the Deputy Planning Director, to walk through the slides. So thanks, Monica.
Okay, great. I am going to Alan. Do you have it all ready?
Yes, I believe I do.
Okay, great. We are going to walk through a presentation today that is basically, if you've been tracking along with all of the things and recent work that we've been doing, you will recognize some of these slides. But again, we invite you to ask questions along the way and to make this an engaging discussion for everyone. So with that, you're in, there you go. Okay. You're in kind of like the presentation view, but there we go. We're good. We're in business now. So today we're just going to quickly talk about how we got here a little bit by the numbers, and then just dive into what are the things we've observed, how are we addressing those things, what are the proposed standards, what's the timeline related to that, and then open the floor for discussion. So next slide. So I just want to frame everything, and we talked about this at council on Monday, that all of this work is happening with our adopted Charlotte Future 2040 plan in mind. So it's really important to remember that for those of you that were deeply involved in the 2040 plan, that was adopted in June 2021, that there were 10 major goals for that plan. And each one of these goals had several policy items that were priorities underneath them. And those goals included, first and foremost, 10-minute neighborhoods. So how are we creating walkable neighborhoods where you can get daily needs and services within 10 minutes of where you live, whether that be by walking, biking, scooter, you can get those services. There's also neighborhood diversity and inclusion, housing access for all, focused around how do we improve our missing middle, how do we have accessible housing that's affordable. And then we move to transit and trail-oriented development and safe and equitable mobility. Transit and trail-oriented development was really about focusing our growth in our transit and trail corridors and focusing on higher density in those specific corridors. Safe and equitable mobility focused around how you get to places, how you access places safely. I'm not going to go through all of the ins and outs of the other ones, but I just do want to read them to make sure that in the context of this discussion, we're thinking about how all 10 of these balance. So healthy, safe, and active communities, integrated, natural, and built environment, diverse and resilient economic opportunity, retaining our identity and charm, and then fiscal responsibility. So you'll probably hear me refer back to some of these in where we are proposing to go and what the text amendment proposes, because it's really important that we're rooting that text amendment into the balance of these 10 major goals. Next slide. So I'm going to dive really deep into neighborhood one place type, which again was a part of that Charlotte Future 2040 plan and has become our land use framework for the city and how we look at different policies, decisions. So neighborhood one place type is and this again is pulled from the text of the Charlotte Future 2040 plan, is that it's about 50% of our land volume, and it's a majority single family homes today. We have in historic neighborhoods, and one of the goals of the comprehensive plan was to get additional duplexes, triplexes, quadruplexes, and townhouses that may also be found within that single family character, and then have greater density near our centers. So our neighborhood center, our community center, and our regional center, and along arterials with high frequency transit. High frequency transit, just to be clear, does not necessarily mean fixed rail transit. So high frequency transit means that there is transit service at 15 minutes or less headways, meaning there's a bus or a train every 15 minutes or less. Next slide. So yeah, there we go. So by the numbers, a little bit, let's just talk about what that neighborhood one land in the city of Charlotte actually looks like. So you just heard me mention it's about a little over 120,000, 127,600 acres of neighborhood one zoned land in the city of Charlotte and the ETJ combined. That's a little over 50% of our overall land area. So about half the city and the ETJ is this neighborhood one place type. Of that, and we've used this number before, 11,300 are parcels that are over 2 acres and are what we classify as developable, meaning that they're vacant, they're underdeveloped, or they're underutilized currently. And about 55% of that is within the city and 45% of that is within the ETJ. So of that 11,300 number, about a quarter of that is within what we call the critical protected watershed or the airport noise overlay map, meaning that those are areas where obviously the critical and protected watershed is pretty self-explanatory. It's areas where we're trying to protect our drinking water and our watershed. And then the airport noise overlay is a federal layer that associates to where there are housing and single family specifically impacts due to noise from airplanes. So that's kind of a general overview of the characteristics of neighborhood one. I'm going to dive into a little bit. This is some newer information. We presented it at council, but most on this call might not have seen that. Just of like a point in time of where we are. So right now, when we adopted the UDO and when we adopted the 2040 plan, especially the 2040 plan, there was a huge push and goal around this infill missing middle and how we were giving people the ability to gradually increase density in existing neighborhoods and communities. So as of today, we have seen approximately 300 total units. So these are not buildings, but the actual number of units themselves that qualify as what you might say infill missing middle, meaning that it is a lot in a neighborhood and there is a duplex on that lot that is a new duplex that has been permitted. And then there's no single family houses around it. So that's about 300 total units. That 300 number only represents about 5% of the total number of duplexes and triplexes that we have seen in permitting. So that's a very small, it moves between about 5 and 7%. So what we are seeing, and again, this is why compact and conservation have both been so important, is about 95% of development with duplexes and triplexes is occurring outside of those infill lots. So it's on larger properties where you're getting many duplexes and triplexes versus a single family neighborhood with one. So let's look a little bit about how that's coming out of the ground. And I'm going to use some older projects just so you can see, because again, we are just now starting to see projects come out of the ground. Next slide. So this project here is really interesting. It's actually located in what would be it's proximate to a center. It is in an area where we probably would see, a little bit of transition. It's on an arterial. It is a duplex and triplex development that in all intents and purposes basically looks like a townhouse project. It's sold as a townhouse project. To the average eye, it is a townhouse project. But when you really dig into it, what's interesting is that it has 6 triplexes, 2 duplexes, and 3 quadruplexes. So when you actually when you see what's built, and I labeled these so you could see duplex, triplex, and then the duplex and triplex combined. When you see what is built, if you were walking by that, you would not say like, oh, look at that duplex there. You would look at it and say, look at that townhouse, look at the townhouses, the townhouse project. So we want to really reiterate this, that when we say duplex, triplex, what we are basically seeing is just different versions and configurations of townhouses. So a project like this is a fairly typical project that previously was going through it went through a rezoning. So this project is just getting ready to get its building permits. It's going through its inspection phase right now, final construction. It was a rezoning in 2021. Again, it's about a 2-acre site. So you can do the math and count on how many units are on this about 3-acre site. Now, this site obviously did not have to meet the standards, all the other additional standards of the UDO. So I will caveat that you can see here, there isn't a tree save or some additional open space, but it's not that atypical of some of the projects that we have seen come through permitting. So next slide. So the next slide is just focused on kind of duplexes. And these are really, the one on the right is a duplex that is nearing permitting, that was permitted as part of the UDO, and the one on the left was pre-UDO. But these are kind of the more typical duplex that I think you see when people, when you are thinking about like a duplex in a neighborhood. This is more the typical type of building that most are thinking of, right? And they do have some characteristics of that townhouse quality, but also they are a duplex. They look a little bit different. So we wanted to kind of show you the differences so you could see what those two look like. I'm going to pause there. I think there's a couple questions around just the numbers that I showed, what the differences between them are. I'm going to just pause for a minute if people have questions around those things before moving on. Eric, did you had,
Yep.
what is the percent of acres or numbers in the ETJ only that are in one and developable and not limited by it's about, it's close to half. So it's almost half of the ETJ falls into an overlay and half does not. So I'll show a map in a minute and you can kind of see what the geography is, but it's pretty much the western geography of the ETJ is either in an watershed overlay or the airport noise overlay, and the eastern side is not.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious on the total number of acres that would be allowed with the compact.
Yeah, so it's about 26% of developable land is in an overlay. So the reverse of that, whatever, 74% of land is not in an overlay. The city of Charlotte has much less in the overlays than the ETJ, just given the geography and kind of the characteristics around the geography. Okay, next slide. So we've also been working on, as part of this compact, and we haven't really talked about that this much before, is just the difference between a subdivision level and the lot level. So within compact and conservation, we're also balancing how we focus on some lot level issues. So where you're getting sidewalks, street trees, how the front is accessed. So where's the front door? Is it facing open space on the back? Is it facing the actual street? How is the lot being served with service? So we have talked a good deal about infrastructure and how the water lines, alley, stormwater is. And then again, just to show, this rendering is actually pulled from one of our triplexes that's in permitting right now. You can see it's just how we're resolving on the lot level issue, this vertically attached product that has kind of that repetitive facade and is basically just 3 units kind of squished together. So you can see here, lots of different issues at play, all of which we are trying to balance through this and current text amendments. Next slide. So all of this work is also being framed by, and just I want to put this in context for everybody else, that this work really all started last summer, right around the time of when the UDO went into full implementation. And it came through a referral of city council to really just first look at duplexes and triplexes on large sites, right? And what are we doing? And is it too much quality, and is the location appropriate? So this is not something that we started thinking about yesterday. It's something that started back in June of, and that June 22nd TPD meeting is June of 2023 of when we first started having this conversation. And all along the way, we've been kind of checking back in, looking at the numbers, looking at the quality of what we're seeing it and where the areas are. So this rationale and the things that we're getting ready to show you are really based all around this original referral and our recommendations coming out of that. So the original referral was to look at developments over 5 acres. We have really dug down into the numbers and are recommending over 2 acres so that we have all the tools in the toolbox. And then some of the locational qualities obviously are things that we have been refining over time. Okay, so just to talk through a little bit about where this can be used and where we would not recommend it to be used, to just kind of continuing on that, is it so, and I'll show another slide that shows you kind of what the development options are. So in the current UDO, there are 3 development options for a subdivision, for an N1 subdivision. There's just base zoning standards, so that's base lot sizes, which are really reflective of patterns that exist in our neighborhoods today. Then there is, which was adopted on May 20th, there is conservation development. So that is where you're required to preserve 40% of open space, green area in your development to get the reduction in lot size to be able to do smaller lots. And then the third piece is the voluntary mixed income residential development, where if you include affordable housing in the development, then you get the reduction of 2 districts. So conservation is fairly similar to that. The difference are there is a couple design standards in conservation that are not in voluntary mixed income, but on the flip side of that, voluntary mixed income, you can go all the way down to developments 1 acre and greater, whereas conservation really starts at about 5 acres because you have to preserve a minimum of 2 acres in conservation to even qualify. That's the smallest area that can be preserved. So that's what exists on the books today. The recommended changes are to add the compact development tool, the compact residential development tool, kind of back into the toolbox, which is basically pulling some of the conservation standards while also balancing that with areas that are appropriate for kind of more density and growth. So and there's some additional qualities that we'll talk about. I was just going to pause to look at the chat. If somebody could help me just scan through the comments, that would be really great. And I can just answer questions as we go.
Yeah, Monica, we have a comment, I think, from Carolyn that what we've shown of the pre versus post UDO duplexes, that the pre UDO duplexes look nicer, the fitting into character of an infill development versus the post UDO duplex. Do you want to talk to that at all? I think we just pulled really just 2 examples. And
Yeah, and I mean,
I'm confirming that that second one was actually post
a
UDO.
UDO. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that is part of what we're trying to balance. So we have some pretty strong limitations on what we can and can't control with duplexes per kind of state statute. So whether that be roof line or materials, garage doors and how they're configured, we cannot control any of those factors, right? So some of those things potentially have occurred in the past through a conditional rezoning, or just based on the fact that of the price point and what the builder wants to build, right? So we're trying to kind of build the frame for duplexes and triplexes within our legal bounds to get the highest quality possible, while also balancing the need for affordable housing, et cetera. So I mean, those were just 2 examples. I mean, we can continue to pull examples and have conversations around like what people like and don't like as we continue to kind of refine the standards. So next question, I'm trying to skim
Yeah,
Andrea.
2 from Andrea.
Yeah, okay. So again, with the overlays selected, is we really want to be conscientious about what criteria we're using for compact. So you'll see some recommendations further around compact and what building types are allowed in it, and the discussion around triplexes. So the overlays, that the watershed overlay, the critical protected, and the airport noise, those are all have regulations around them where we feel like it's not necessarily appropriate to add more density and intensity. Other areas of the ETJ kind of do meet like a base threshold. You know, there's areas of the city of Charlotte too that are kind of outside that 10-minute neighborhood. So it's not just ETJ, it's really city and ETJ. And we are in this working to kind of come up with a balance between what density is allowed and what development patterns we're seeing. And then we would not propose, and we're talking about this in phase 3, we would not propose those areas as good candidates for an increase in density above what this would potentially allow. So hopefully that answers your question. So let's go on to the next.
Yeah. The last question is from Rob. Do you know what the price point was for the 2 duplex examples you showed?
I would have to go back to what the first example was sold several years ago. The second example, I believe that's in the high like 350s per side, somewhere around there. That's our best guess, right, Allison? We were just guessing on it.
It's under contract, the whole building for 700, I believe.
Yeah, so I would have to go back and look at the first example is right off the plaza. And I would have to go back and see what that sold for when I'm not exactly sure when when it was finished.
Okay. I think the price point's probably, if it's been a couple years, price point's probably different today.
Yeah.
Or the assessed value is probably a lot different today than it was. Just keep that in mind.
Yeah, no, I mean, exactly. That's why I was like, I don't want to say it's apples to apples because it maybe is not.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
Just to talk through the schedule a little bit, conservation was just adopted May 20th. Compact, that's what we're working on now, what we'll keep talking about. And you'll hear me refer to the phase 3 and the residential supply phase 3, which is what we will be working on over the summer through UAC meetings and into the fall which will include potentials. And again, Andrea, that's where we were talking about kind of where is it appropriate to even have more density when proximate to centers and transit corridors, et cetera. And that is flexibility for cottage courts. Do we get more flexibility for ADUs and potentially allow more stack quads, which is like 2 units on the top, 2 units on the back, on the bottom, and then potentially more townhouses. So next slide. So again, these 3 development tools, just seeing how they play out. We have the existing, we estimate that'll be 20 to 30% of development. We have the phase 1 conservation, which is already adopted. We'll see that approximately 5 to 15% of the time. It will most likely occur in those overlay areas where there is the need for kind of more protection. And then the phase 2 compact, we believe we'll see probably 60 to 75% of developments using this tool that we are getting ready to talk through. I will just make a statement that, you know, we had tools before that allowed reduced lot sizes. We call it at the bottom here, pre-UDO cluster. And those already gave a density kind of bonus. But remember, all of the land use in those was single family, right? So any of that density bonus was happening in just single family buildings. So right now, the numbers that you're seeing and the sites that you're seeing are kind of combining that ability to do smaller sites with the ability to do duplexes and triplexes, right? So that's really what's getting you that higher number. So it's not that we didn't have a tool before, we did. It's just really the building types being used that is kind of changing the dynamic. Next slide. So we've talked through this a lot. Why are we doing this right now? We really need a development tool that is appropriate to today's market and what people are building. Last year was the first year that more attached new construction was built in Charlotte than detached. So we're really seeing a big shift in the market just based on land cost, and what's happening is a big shift from kind of the typical single family house to more of a attached unit house that puts the price points at a place that more people can afford. And you can see here just kind of some of the bigger reasons why. If we just kept our existing lot standards, then we really would just see housing continue to escalate if we only allowed our base districts. Next one. So let's talk through some of the proposed standards. And again, we can stop before I dive into these. Any other broad questions about where we're going, what we're doing? I'm going to end on a couple of the phase 3 goals, just so we can kind of set the stage for that. Any other big questions? Let's keep rolling. Let's go. Okay, so proposed standards. Again, the compact is allowed. You can see here everything on the right. There's been a lot of questions in the chat about where developable land is. All the blue on this side on the right, it are 2 acre plus parcels. So all those little navy dots are the 2 acre plus parcels that are considered developable based on our analysis. And then all of that hatching on the left are where the overlays are. So compact will be a new development tool that's allowed throughout this area on all of those blue parcels, basically, that are not in the overlay. So it's calibrated, obviously, with feedback from y'all's first meeting. We'll keep talking through that today. The trade-off for compact is that you're required to do an additional 10% of usable improved, we call it improved common open space, in order to be able to use the tools. So in compact, and really for all development, we are yes, we acknowledge we will be working on the airport overlay. I'm going to close my comments so I can see. Okay. We are proposing that only up to 25% of lots may have triplexes on them in N1A and N1B. Lots is the way that we think it's best to regulate this. That really averages out to about 28%-ish of total units. It depends on how big a site is, honestly. And so that would apply not just to compact, but the way it is currently drafted, that would also apply to base developments over 2 acres and conservation development over 2 acres in all in 1A and in 1B. Again, we've talked about the protected watersheds and the airport noise overlay. We are going to also, and we'll continue talking about this over the summer, is add the townhomes in phase 3 when adjacent to centers and corridors. We want to still have a conversation around, and this gets back to what Andrea was commenting, is that if basically the product that we're seeing is looks, walks, talks like a townhouse, then we feel like it is appropriate in specific locations to dial up. That's not included in this text amendment, but we want to keep that kind of at fresh front of mind so that we need, we kind of can continue that conversation and make sure that that's still very clear that's where we're going.
Pardon me, Monica, just quick clarification. When you say dial up, can you please clarify what you mean by that to a lay person like myself?
Dial up means just like allow more units. So adding townhouses in phase 3, dial up, add more, however you would like to put that in context. So right now a townhouse per our legal definition is 4+ units vertically separated. So 4, 5, 6 you can put next to each other, right? What we're seeing is that people are doing triplexes that are basically the exact same unit, just 3 of them and then a space, and then 3 of them and then a space. So there's some cost savings if that gets smushed together into one 6-unit building. And so we want to be able to allow that where it is appropriate. So in the locations where it makes sense. So within a half mile of a community activity center, within a quarter mile of a neighborhood activity center, within a transportation corridor. So that's where we want to, in phase 3, go. Okay, let's go to the next slide. But again, I want to be really clear, that's not in the compact text amendment. That's our phase 3 goal, but we want to be very explicit about that. So this just shows you all the dimensional standards for where the base district is and what you can do in the compact district. So everything from front setback, corner, side, rear, the total lot area, the residential width, and the max building coverage, which we're proposing to not have a max building coverage in compact development. So what we have heard loud and clear is that really what controls how many units are fitting on the site is that lot dimension of the width of the lot dimension, the minimum lot area, and then some of those and the max building coverage, really. So this is fairly similar to what you get with conservation, but remember in compact, it's an extra 10% of common open space. Next slide. So also within compact, you can, instead of where in conservation, you can have over 50%, you could have all your lots fronting on open space. You can only have a maximum of 30% of your lots on open space in compact. And so that we get more public streets built and less private alleys. So that does have more street frontage lots. And that does kind of tie into the higher open space standards once you're fronting on them. You know, remember it has to still be approved. So we also are requiring a buffer around the entire perimeter of a compact residential development that cannot be on private property. It is in common ownership, that buffer, so as to protect kind of in perpetuity and provide that transition when you're adjacent to another neighborhood. So that buffer is really important when you're next to a neighborhood 1 place type. You can use that buffer towards your tree save if it is up to 30 feet. So, and all the standards are met. Next slide. So about the common open space, just so everybody knows, we already require 15% of green area for development. So there has to be 15% of green area required. And then this common open space is an additional 10%. So that's a total of 25% of preserved green space, open space. And now the minimum dimension for the common open space is at least 50 feet in all dimensions. So for it to count towards that 10%, it has to be at least 50 feet in all dimensions. So next slide. So you can have that 50 feet and just have a 20-foot wide connection via a path that connects the common open space to a public street. So think like a little greenway, spur, or a green space that might be embedded in a block. You still have to have that connection to the public street, but it doesn't have to be the full 50 feet. We really want those common open spaces to be accessible from all lots within 1,000 feet. So it's really interesting. We're like in the low 90s of public spaces and parks out of 100 top municipalities. And this common open space, one of our lowest scoring qualities is that we're not within most residents are not within a 5 or 10 minute walk of a publicly accessible open space. So all within a compact development, you have to be able to get to a common open space within 1,000 feet. So also you can use up to 25% of that required space in areas under utility easements or water. So think like you can see on the image on the right, that's a stormwater pond that can count up to 25%. We have several greenways in town that have overhead utilities. I know Irwin Creek Greenway over in Wesley Heights has a above ground utility. And so think of that as the aesthetic. That can be up to 25% of what is required. Next slide. Again, it has to be improved. If it also has to have street trees if lots are fronting on it. So instead of having kind of trees in the back on a private alley, you have to have trees in that common open space at the same rate of what we would require on a public street, which is 1 every 40. And we also are preserving heritage trees by allowing, if you save a heritage tree, you can count it towards the green area tree save requirement. So this is a slight change from earlier drafts. We heard that really protecting our existing heritage tree canopy is really important. So that is the one exception where you can count that towards a requirement. Next slide. So we have been working, a lot of people on this call have participated in these charrettes, and so we appreciate those of you who have attended. A couple of the standards that I just reviewed are the result of, I believe we've had 2 charrettes or more working sessions and 1 follow-up meeting with designers to kind of work through how these standards would play out. And you can go to the next slide. You might see some of your faces in that previous one. And I just want to review some of the changes that we've made since the charrette, just so everybody's aware. We added the allowance for the 30% fronting on open space. We allowed more flexibility between the width and length of the lots so that you could get that lower lot width. And we tightened up how we did the buffer based on some of the testing. So we tested a couple options for the buffer, and the one that we landed on is the one that seemed to be what most were using in testing. So we did that as well. You can go to the next slide. And then we've also been testing on our own. We've had a couple consultants kind of working on this, and thankfully some of the designers who have originally participated have been sharing some of their site plans. I'll put a plug in if anybody wants to walk through a site plan with me. I like to look through them, talk about them, and kind of see what we're seeing. What you see here is just all of the different options. So pre-UDO base, pre-UDO cluster, pre-UDO with tree save, kind of old conservation, current conservation, which is now adopted on the books, and then what proposed compact is. So from what we can see, proposed compact is getting you slightly lower numbers than what that old conservation was. But remember, we're getting better standards. So we're getting more public streets, we're getting quality open space, we're getting additional buffers that weren't there previously. So we're getting some trade-offs for a density that is not too far off of that. And we also have a smaller area in which it's applicable. So next slide. So you can see here, this is for people who don't read site plans, this is going to look really confusing and I'll dive into it. But you can see here that those unit counts and unit numbers aren't too different from front loaded versus rear loaded. Also, we pulled the 25% number of triplexes from testing all of our site plans and testing out the idea of triplexes on corners. And where we landed is that triplexes on corners for the majority of sites is right around 25%. And so we believe that there's some additional flexibility by allowing that 25% to be kind of able to move throughout a project and phase. So that's kind of how we landed on that number too. Next slide. And just so you can see a little bit more what that looks like, you can see here in that hedgerow, the buffer, you can see the triplexes on corners. You can see down in the bottom left, that usable common open space. And then you can also see the public street network that connects to future development sites. So depending on what the adjacent development is, by getting public streets is we can potentially get streets that connect to adjacent development. Next slide. So we also, again, we've been testing, we probably tested 10 to 15 different sites. We've also tested, this is a different site and kind of looking at what the yield might be here. This site was getting about 39 units with the new changes. If you were to max it out before, you could probably get, and to do all triplexes, you were getting about 10 more units, 11 more units. Again, every site, I just want to caution everybody that every site is a little different. So it's really hard to jump to a conclusion of like, this is a blanket X reduction because every site is a little unique and different in how it lays out. So next slide. So just as a reminder for the schedule, we're kind of in this middle box right now where we are working towards the hearing on June 17th. Then we'll have a zoning committee recommendation and then the decision, and you can go to the next slide. This fits within this 3-phase strategy. I'll just mention really quick the phase 3 of the strategy, which, start putting your thinking caps on because we really want to have a lively discussion around that. Includes how we get duplexes more prevalent in the infill, accessory dwelling units, cottage courts, getting more by right development near those centers and corridors, and then any additional affordable housing tools that we need to add. This bottom right here is a cottage court that someone sent me from a national builder. And I think that that's an interesting unit and product type. And so we'll really be focusing on that as well and how we can get that really wide spectrum of unit types. And then next slide. This just, again, outlines just the next steps for compact. So, as we're in that middle box focused on compact, we have been having community meetings. We have our public hearing scheduled. We're having the UAC meeting today. Tonight is the next community meeting, which you would see some of these same slides and some additional ones and really more details around some of the specifics. We'll have hearing on the 17th. We will then move to zoning committee recommendation on the 20th. And then we feel like it's very important for us to get to a decision by June 24th. So with that, can you go to the next slide, please? I have a few questions up that I can leave up and we can go through the comments. And with that, let's have a conversation around it. I see the chat has been active. I haven't been checking it, but let's chat about it.
Monica, I think the first question that we had not answered was from Eric at 11:59. said if I did the math correctly, there would be about 3,865 acres that would be in the ETJ and could allow compact to occur. Does that sound right?
I don't know that number off the top of my head, but that sounds higher than it actually is. So we can confirm that. I feel like that number's lower because it's actually, I'm like 90% sure that it's about half of the ETJ. The ETJ is 45% of that 11,300, and
Yeah,
then
that's
Yeah.
that's 5,000 and change. And then I took 76% of that.
no, that's not
But-
the right math, because the right math
Okay.
is 26% is of the total 11,300. About half the ETJ is in an overlay.
Okay, so about 2,500 then?
Yeah, so it's something small. Yeah, it's a
Okay.
good amount smaller than that, something like that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's that, sorry if I wasn't clear on that before. It's about 26% of the total city and ETJ combined is what is in an overlay. The ETJ has a much higher number because both the airport and the watershed overlays have more ETJ jurisdiction than city jurisdiction.
Thanks, Monica. I was just concerned that between now, if this gets passed in phase 3, just what the number of acres that could be developed or submitted for ETJ without having maybe some additional protections or in place.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that comment and thought. And then we've really tried to have a balanced decision and conversation around it, around the ETJ versus the city.
Okay, the next question was from Joseph. How did you resolve the issue some of us here had with the requirement to disallow the piecing of separate adjacent parcels together to get the 2+ acres needed to do a by right compact development? And I think,
yeah, do you want to talk to that?
well, I was just going to say, I think I started to answer some of that and asked for a little bit more clarification. But I think that's something we are actually going to go back and look at one more time. But go ahead, Monica.
I'm happy to clarify that recall what was discussed. I think there were some people in the meeting who were just opposed to that being there at all, and I tend to agree with them. But if there must be something, I think it would make sense to allow for arterials to be excluded from that requirement, since more denser types of developments along those seem more appropriate. So that's the clarification, if that helps with being able to answer the question.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
arterials are excluded in the draft. Go ahead, Monica. Sorry, I don't want to.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, we're also looking at possibly post-hearing whether we should make any changes with significantly underdeveloped or vacant pieces of land. What the concern that is addressing is people going into an established neighborhood and with a lot pattern and buying up 6 houses and tearing them down and redeveloping those in the middle of a neighborhood. But if it's vacant and has never been developed, that's something we're looking at. I don't know, Monica, Allison, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I mean no, I thought you did a good job pretty much around we're trying to balance what is an established neighborhood and the lot patterns and characteristics in the middle of an established neighborhood with this idea of adding missing middle, gentle density. And you have that occurring on single lots, right? And then to Laura's point is then how do we balance that where I don't think we feel like we're in a comfortable place where somebody today could go and buy 3 lots of existing homes, tear them down, and then do 7 lots or 8 lots of duplexes or triplexes where it really changes the character of a street. So we're trying to balance that equation, and we are considering making some tweaks and changes around like common ownership, vacancy. We already have in the voluntary mixed income tool projects over an acre. So if it has affordable housing in it, they already can do that if you combine to make a project over an acre. So we're trying to balance all of those like considerations. And I mean, the arterial one is, we feel really solid on that's like where you would, or long arterials is where you would want to have that transition to more density.
Question. I had two questions. I think I heard you sort of, this is Angela, sorry. Did I hear something that, I think that I heard that right, that if it's like vacant land, that's, undeveloped, because, a lot of parcels in Charlotte aren't typically an acre, like a
Right.
parcel itself. And so if I'm hearing right, if it's undeveloped and they're all touching, then that's an opportunity, or that's what we're sort of playing around with to do compact.
Yeah, that's what we're currently looking at, is like, can we write it in a way in which that there is some flexibility around, like if there are multiple parcels that have yet to be combined, but they're all vacant, and they have been vacant, like to Lara's point, they just haven't been developed, then that might be an opportunity where it's more appropriate.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. My second question is, when you say that, I'm just curious, when I hear y'all say sort of arterials, like what's an example like of a street that when you say like an arterial, that'd be an ideal place for that? Like, can you give me like what you're thinking? I'm just trying to make sure I'm sort of understanding when I hear more developed. Because when I see arterials, they're typically very expensive, and they're like not a lot of like residential, like Park Road and things like that. So I was just curious, like what streets do y'all typically identify when you're thinking along these lines of
So
arterial?
I can show you, if I can share my screen. I don't know if I can share my screen. The way that the city defines arterials is the Charlotte Streets map. And the way that we have it referenced in here is actually 4+ lane arterials. So that would exclude those. I still can't share, but I can drop a link in the chat so you can go see the Charlotte Streets map. But everything that is in kind of blue, orange, red on this map that I'm getting ready to drop into the chat, you'll see is that's what is like defined as an arterial per City of Charlotte policy.
Okay.
But the caveat within this specific text amendment is that those are 4-lane arterials.
That there are 4
So
lanes.
like a
Okay.
Park Road, like a road that might have residential on it currently in single family residential, but is a higher volume street as it's evolved over time.
Okay. For some
Sounds
reason, when
like-
I think arterials, I think roads that lead to highways. Is that the right thinking or no? Oh, I see.
No, it's more than that. Sorry, I was just pausing. It's more than that in our current like definitions of it.
Okay. Thank you.
So our
Yeah,
next comment was from Shad. And he said the airport noise overlay indicated on Charlotte Explorer does not accurately reflect the correct contour. Updates may be needed, and just mentioned that we have updated it in the draft. We actually referenced the map that the airport has, the latest map the airport has. We probably do need to add the contour name 65 DNL.
Yeah, we've been having conversations around that. So it's like the airport is just currently updating their
Yeah,
map.
been
So
one of
ours
those-
will follow suit.
Yeah, we've tried to have them do that for years, and so yeah, because I mean, you look at the map and that newest runway is not even in the airport noise boundary.
Yeah, we've heard though that too, the cross is gonna, because the cross is changing anyways, the cross runway
Yeah,
is changing.
coming off.
That's like coming off, so anyways,
So,
there's some, yeah.
yeah, we're gonna refer directly to the latest released map. And we know that they will be releasing a new map January 1st of 2025. And we'll refer to the appropriate contour if you're within that 65 DNL contour on that map. So I think that'll take care of the problem without having to go back and change immediately the overlay. We won't refer to the noise overlay. Instead, we'll refer to the airport map. The next item was from Rob. Said with the 25% limitation on triplexes, which to be clear applies to all N1A and N1B areas and developments over 2 acres. I'm going to put a parenthetical except for voluntary mixed income. How will you account for the loss of potential units in terms of meeting current and future housing supply needs? During the development of the UDO, you did studies identifying how many additional units would be created when contemplating higher densities. Have you gone back and reviewed those?
Have we gone back and reviewed those? We are in the current midst of doing, so we actually did an additional study and work around townhouses and the demand for attached. And we're actually doing another draft and study over the summer, looking at townhouses and feasibility around 3 and 5 unit townhouses and the demand around those. So we'll be sharing all that information as it comes. We have, Laura, if you want to speak to the potential higher densities and how many units that would have been contemplated, I will be really candid and honest that we have seen an explosive amount of units in permitting.
Yes.
And so we feel very confident that there's a lot of units currently permitted under but prior to the text amendment changes that are going to be meeting a lot of the demand for the coming months and years. And that even with this limitation and restriction, there's still, because again, we're going from single family, pre-June 1, 2023, we didn't allow duplexes on every lot. All the studies that we're seeing is we're still getting pretty high densities as compared to what we were pre-UDO. And to the fact of the matter is that we feel like there's going to be plenty of market, and we're trying to balance that infrastructure gap, the infrastructure need with the housing supply, and we feel like we are in a solid place and we will still be meeting that demand. But more to come on the specific townhouse piece of it and where we are putting even additional densities.
Okay.
And I'll add, I don't think that, I mean, we didn't really, I don't think we really realized that that we would get such a large amount of large developments really being developed as townhomes, as 2 and 3 unit townhomes. I mean, we don't allow townhomes in N1 outside of a couple buildings. And so it's kind of it's an interesting development pattern that we didn't predict. And so wanting to be more thoughtful too about if we recognize that we need more townhomes and we need by right, but wanting to make sure that we couple that with locational criteria, which is part of an additional study we're doing right now.
Okay, I appreciate that. And thank you for that thorough review you're doing. I think that's going to be immensely helpful. I was just referring to remember the studies you did during the UDO, the guy out of Denver, who had partnered with David Green, and you had done a couple of versions of, and you had anticipated, X amount of units. I was just wondering if you had utilized that as you're doing sort of the follow-up of, where were we? What are we doing with this new policy? How does it potentially impact that based on that study that was done? But that was what I was referring to.
Yeah, in that economic impact analysis, we didn't really do a lot of analysis on these subdivisions that we're getting. I mean, that again was kind of a surprise to us. And so really the units that we were anticipating were probably in a different form. And so this is a new area for us, which is why we've been doing some work that with Matt Prosser in the past, like 6 months or so, on looking more at attached product and townhomes, and then continuing some of that work just to make sure we're getting that right. So we're doing most of that analysis now.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
I just said, yeah.
Can I just add one more thing on the airport thing, just before I forget? I understand it's gonna be updated. However, that could change. So when you talk about the amount of acreage that's in or potentially not developable because it's in the overlay, that is going to change when you make that adjustment, right? So I would suggest just being careful when you specify that amount of acreage, saying, hey, this is subject to change potentially because we're going to change the overlay. Just being honest about it, I think that's something you ought to point out.
Yeah, and we've been given an indication that it's not going to get that much bigger. So we can run those numbers that it's actually, if anything, anyways, we can run the numbers to be really clear about that, but we have not been given any indication that it's like growing by X% or anything like that, where it's going to be a shocking number. I just wanted to like point out for all the people who are not industry people on the call that really what we've had over the past couple of years is this merging of the market and the financing for kind of a typical TOD or apartment structured project has really not existed. There's a lot under construction, but there's not a lot like in the pipeline. And because of that, and because of what people are financing along with our regulations, is we've just seen an explosion of growth in the townhouse kind of product, as Allison was mentioning. And really this backdoor way to do duplexes and triplexes has just like exponentially increased that amount. So it's not just our regulations, it's also this like combining of market forces where the industry is in general, along with like what people can do by right. So we did not foresee that in 2021 when all that work was being done, because it did not exist at that point in time. So like, just to be clear too, it's not even just our regulations, it's also just the market. People on this call are working in townhouses that have never worked in townhouses before, because that's the big demand right now.
I want to just add one quick thing about the airport. Alan and I spoke with Stuart Hare of the airport yesterday about the contours. They will actually be shrinking. And so there may be additional land that becomes available for compact development. And that virtually after the new contour comes out, most of that land will be actually owned by the airport.
Did that take into consideration the Part 150 study that's going on right now? Is that,
yes,
talk about
yes.
that? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I'm going to ask, welcome, Shad, could we, are you okay with the next item you had? No new street shall be located along the response, in the interest of time, that I put in chat?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good comment. Andrea said, my question is based upon several proposals brought to our residents association that offer a mix of open space access options, including greenway connectivities, but long-term responsibility for maintenance is not clearly defined. So it typically, and I think Josh Weaver is on and Jason Prescott, but typically Solomon Fortune, that's going to be managed, if it's not sold to another entity to manage as open space, that's going to be managed by the homeowner association if it is within the boundaries of your subdivision. I don't know if that helps or not, but if someone else purchases the open space to be used for open space on that site, not for something else, like a park and rec, or purchased or it was dedicated to park and rec, then they would have the responsibility for maintenance. I think
Okay.
the next, does that help? Andrea?
A little bit. I think there's in some of the proposals that were coming forward, there was kind of a combination of greenway connectivity, which is fabulous. Everybody is encouraging of that. But some of that access is considered fully public, but it's not being dedicated to, may not be dedicated to, say, the county or Parks and Rec, depending on where you're located. So I guess then that public access becomes the responsibility of the HOAs. So these were some of the ambiguities that people were unclear of in encouraging the open space requirements, whether or not their common open spaces would be public access, and then who would have the long-term accountability for that if it's not clearly being dedicated. There was another proposal that came through where a portion of the site was going to be dedicated very clearly to Parks and Rec, and that's fantastic. That was clear from the onset. But I think a number of these proposals are not clear.
And they may not know at the point that they're coming through it. Maybe they could be negotiating with Park and Rec or talking with them still.
Got it.
So,
okay. All right. Thank you.
Eric, I think you're up next at 12:17.
I gotta go back and see what that was. Sorry, Laura. Oh, I was just mentioning, I see it now. I was just talking back, bring up the point that, there is an abundant number of neighborhood 1As and Bs out there, and that, some of what, Rob's, and you addressed it too with the amount of subdivisions coming in, but the amount of the zoning needs to be updated as well. And just bring the opportunity to bring that up again, that hopefully next year we take a look at looking at neighborhood ones and doing the realignments of zoning on them. Just my plug. Thank you.
And I think, Joseph, we've talked about your comment from 12:18.
Yeah, you covered that.
Okay. At 12:22 from Andrea, just wanting to confirm the overlay areas of the ETJ still have a conservation option available. That's a yes, right?
Yes.
Monica?
Yes, that's a yes. So basically, if you're developing in the ETJ, you'll use conservation or base standards, those two options, or voluntary mixed income, the voluntary mixed income housing option. So.
Okay, I think that Andre is the next, your item at 12:26, just a comment. Steel Creek Residents Association supports reducing duplex and triplex lots in N1A and B where infrastructure is insufficient. Lots are not in proximity of neighborhood centers and or does not fit the character of existing neighborhoods. Anything you want to add on that one?
No, I think the both of the tools that you are trying to develop here are looking to address that. So thank you.
Matt, 2+ and up, please. 4+ feels too big.
Yeah, that goes back to the aggregation of parcels below 2 acres. I would imagine you guys can probably run some analysis and look at the 2+ streets only, because I think that's the
Okay.
next tier down. And I'd just be curious to know, I understand you don't want somebody pulling 3 or 4 parcels together in an established neighborhood and making something different, but I'm curious the degree to which you would find that on a 2+ avenue might be worth analysis. Because I think,
no, that's good.
those smaller developments may, because what, the whole point I think is to put smaller lots together that aren't getting developed by themselves on their own into something that can get developed. And the driveways on the busier streets may be a challenge, whereas 2+ might be a more achievable. I guess the question is why not on 2+, and maybe it's worth some study.
Well, I think that's received, and we can work with our GIS team to kind of think through that and consider that, even if not in the immediate, like look at it kind of as we do this, this like availability of land continual kind of trying to understand like what's out there, what's likely to be developed, what's not likely to be developed, like, and how are we calibrating? So I think that's a fair comment.
Thank you.
Shad has the next question about where common open space abuts a street at the perimeter of compact residential. And us saying that we need to go back to the front setback for lots on this, that may not be necessary. So I think that's noted and something we should go back and take a look at. I certainly understand the point. If you're 50 feet back, then
Yeah,
perhaps that's
because I guess if there's common open space that's not required common open space, it could be less than 50 feet. So maybe in those situations, you might want to use that setback. But if it is meeting the minimum requirement, which is 50 feet for required open space, then it seems like the 5 feet would be acceptable.
Thank you. We got that noted. Something to look at. How does Andrea, how does the compact option affect impervious surfaces? And all of our stormwater regs related to that will still apply. Will BMPs be considered quality open space or common open space? BMPs will not meet the requirement for the usable open space. And Carolyn has a nice note to staff. Thank you, Carolyn.
Yeah, thank you guys. So anybody else have an additional, we have a few minutes. If anybody has any other comments or thoughts or things that we should consider, this is, I really appreciate everybody's comments, questions. I feel like they've all been very thoughtful and
I have an idea for the second question you had, like other things, other tweaks to consider. I don't think it's going to be very popular with the council, but I would love for you guys to look at, can you pull up the slide, the one that has like the big overlay map with all the available 2 acre plus parcels? Just for everybody to see, and I say this from with the expertise of a layperson, so it may not be feasible, but I'm for just limiting or eliminating parking requirements as in a way that's when it's practical. Like, so what are there opportunities on here where it's some of these parcels are closely aligned to like I would imagine it would have to be a current TOD for it to be applicable or something like that, or current or we're within a certain reasonably close distance for someone to get to like a transit corridor, or even things that are coming up like I see a section on Graham Street where the 22 is going to have with the better bus ride, once that finally gets implemented there, it's going to have 15-minute headways. So are there opportunities there and it may be close to Camp North, and I can't tell on the map, but are there places like that where you could you could sort of tailor certain exceptions to reduce parking requirements, because I know we're in a phase where a lot of people need cars. And that's just kind of what it is. But there may be opportunities for people to rent or buy in places who don't want to have a car, where they can still practically have a lifestyle where, you know, they can get to work, they can get to the grocery store, the doctor, the bank, whatever they need to, and save money. Just an example of a wasted opportunity. I live close to, and this is a different zoning area, the TOD, and a different idea. The TOD for the Sugar Creek Station, just to me, is such a lost opportunity with all those parking decks there. And I know we're not talking parking decks, we're talking driveways and access to roads, and that's can make things different in a way that I might not fully understand. But so I'm just looking for the experts to take, consider any opportunities, because I'm looking at this map and I can just tell as a layperson, those opportunities, if available at all, will be very few. But why not get those wins if they're available to us?
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying. I think that we, as staff, really want to do all we can to reduce parking requirements, in as many situations as possible, trying to balance the politics of it, the perception that there's never enough parking, and the just where we are as a city and how we manage our curb space and our curb lane and our parking is quite a tough
What
balance in the act. But
what
I mean,
what
I
comp-
hear you.
what
We're
I,
open to it.
yeah, I have a here's a rhetorical question. I guess you can take as a rhetorical question. What comprehensive plan goal does subsidized parking meet? And feel free to treat that as a rhetorical question.
Noted. Okay, anybody else have any other questions, thoughts? Things that y'all would like to discuss in this? Hey, we thank you all for your time. Follow along on this journey with us. We have the meeting tonight. We'll be at hearing on the 17th, and we look forward to circling back with this group to talk through all the phase 3 and all the things we might include in phase 3. And we can bring back some of the things that you all talked about today in regards to townhouses, parking, cottage courts, ADUs, etc. All the things we might be able to add to the toolbox in phase 3, in addition to compact and conservation that's adopted. So we appreciate y'all's time. We know it's a lot of details to talk through, and we appreciate staying with us for all those details.